Training, one of the most important things for any company. They have to make sure that all of their employees are up to date with the latest information, have the latest skills, and are able and capable of doing the job at hand. But just like with training that students may be familiar with, say for athletics training or music training, there are many different types of training. If you take a 100 meters runner, they will train in the gym, they will train on the track, they may train in the classroom, all to prepare for themselves. And these are known as different modes of training. So what this lesson is about the different modes of training, i.e. the different ways that employees can be trained. And I'm going to break this up into two types of categories. First one is called on the job training, and the second one, not too creative of a name, it's just simply the opposite of the first one, is called off the job training. So all the training modes that you need to know are essentially broken down into these two categories of on the job versus off the job. And the difference between the two is very, very simple. On the job is when employees learn when they're actually doing the work at hand. And off the job means that, well, they're not doing the work. They're in a separate classroom, or they may not even be in the workplace. So take a teacher. If a teacher is having on-the-job training, their department head or the principal is actually in the classroom watching the teacher teach and giving advice during that session or maybe after the class. Off the job training would be when the teacher is not even in the classroom. The teacher would be in a separate room somewhere, sitting down, learning themselves, reading a book, or maybe they're in a university classroom themselves learning, and they're not actually teaching. So let's take a look at, let's focus for the time being with on-the-job training. And what I want to do is I want to look at the advantages and disadvantages. So let's see if I can just draw a chart here. So when we're focusing on-the-job training, and we're going to look at the pros, and we're also going to look at the cons. Oops, yeah, there we go. So the advantages and disadvantages of on-the-job training. So let's just forget about off-the-job for the time being. So on the job, remember, this is where the worker is actually doing the work and learning at the same time. So the manager is actively viewing them at the same time. And so given that the manager is actually there at the same time as the worker is learning and doing the job, then the employees are getting immediate feedback from supervisors. So they're learning immediately. They're getting actual feedback as they work and learn at exactly the same time. Secondly, they're getting customized training. This is training that is highly relevant to the company and to the job that they're actually doing. They're doing, maybe it's a salesman, and the salesman is actually selling some clothes, and the supervisor is watching them and teaching them how to sell the clothes while they're interacting with the customer. So it's highly customized, it's highly relevant, it's specific for the corporate culture. Another great advantage of on-the-job training, and this may become more clear when we look at off-the-job training, but on-the-job training, it is cost effective. You don't need classrooms, equipment, to any sort of specialized training equipment. You don't need it because the worker is, again, let's take in a sales room and they're in a clothes store. They're actually in the store, the facility is already there, they're selling the clothes to the customer. There is no need to spend money to hire trainers, to hire a separate classroom for this salesperson to actually go into to learn. They're just using the existing resources that are already there. So it's very cost effective. There is no need for expensive trainers. There is no need for separate classrooms. There is no need for expensive sort of equipment. And let's move on to the disadvantages of on-the-job training. Well, clearly, one of the major disadvantages is that the supervisors, or let's call them your managers, they may lack commitment, time, ability to train you. On-the-job training requires the manager and the supervisor to actually see what you're doing and give advice back and forth. But what if these supervisors, managers are extremely busy? What if they lack the commitment to train? What if they lack the ability? Maybe they're not good trainers. They're good at what they do in their job, but they may not actually be very good trainers. That's going to have a significant impact on the quality of the training that you as an employee receive. Another problem is that it could well be disruptive to work. Or actually, let me change that to slightly say disruptive to work may impact customers. I mean, just imagine if there's a salesman who's training and selling the clothes to the customer at the same time, and there's a manager that's providing feedback. That can be quite disruptive. That can impact the customer. And there can be mistakes that are made during the process that would affect the overall operations of the business. And last but not least, I also want to stress that this is a very informal type of training. There isn't a sort of curriculum. There isn't a sort of detailed plan of what you learn from day to day. It's just a manager on the spot giving feedback, and it may not be incredibly sophisticated. Let's now move to off-the-job training. So if you remember, on the job is when the worker is actually in the workplace doing their work and learning at the same time. Off the job, they're not even in the workplace. They're somewhere else, and it is absolutely, there's no disruption to the work that they're actually doing at the time. So if we take a look again at some of the advantages and disadvantages, so let me go in here and put disadvantages. So in off-the-job training, the advantages is that the worker, the employee, will get the most up-to-date knowledge can be learned. Because now you're in a specialized, say, university classroom or a specific vocational course training program. You're learning the most up-to-date knowledge that your own managers may not know, but experts who are training you may be able to teach you this most up-to-date information. Another advantage is that it doesn't affect the customers or the work performance. Because one of the problems of on-the-job training is that it may actually have an impact to customers and to the work productivity, because you're trying to learn as you go. But this doesn't interfere with the actual job. You're in a separate location. You're not actually doing your job at the time you're learning, so it doesn't affect the customers. It doesn't affect work performance. It's also less disruptive to managers. Your managers and supervisors are not involved. You're off in a separate place getting special expert training from some expert trainer. It doesn't have any impact on the managers, so the managers can continue their work. And lastly, a major advantage is something that I'm going to call networking opportunities. Because with off-the-job training, you're likely going to go to, say, some sort of university classroom or some sort of center where you will meet like-minded employees from other companies. And so you can learn from them, you can network with them, you can exchange ideas. If you go to like a sales class, you will meet salesmen from other companies, and you can learn from those salesmen in a kind of collaborative industry effort. Disadvantages of off-the-job training. Well, the major disadvantage is it's resource heavy, meaning that it's costly, it's expensive. You have to hire trainers, you have to have a classroom, you may have to have specialized equipment, and this can cost a lot of money for the company as well as for the employee. Another problem is that, whoops, let's try again, is that it may not be customized or relevant to the company. Because if you send the employee to some sort of university course, that university course may not be 100% relevant to that individual company. If Zara sends their salesman to some selling class at a university, they may not actually learn about the culture of Zara. They'll be learning about a general sales course. So it may not be actually customized or relevant to the company. And I guess the last disadvantage to highlight is that the employees are away from their jobs. So given that they're actually not in the workplace, well, that could also have an impact on their jobs because they're not there. It affects workflow, it affects work duties. Nobody's there to pick up the phone, nobody's there to talk to the client. So it could actually also, off-the-job training, be in some way disruptive to the work. I'd like to just finish this topic by just simply giving a few examples of on-the-job training and a few examples of off-the-job training. So off-the-job. So some examples of on-the-job training, because there are different methods, as I mentioned at the beginning, about different ways that you can do on-the-job training. So one is called mentoring or coaching. This is where an employee is paired up with a manager, and they have a one-to-one kind of relationship where they give certain feedback, and they train them during the course of the year. There's also something called apprenticeship training. This is a highly specialized training course that takes place in the company, and there is a curriculum. It requires a manager to give feedback, and it's training the person on the job. In a separate class, we can go into a little bit more detail on what exactly apprenticeship training is. One more on the job training is, sorry if I can just go back in here, is called job rotation. That's where the employee will move from one desk to the other. So imagine a teacher. Maybe the teacher's in learning from a biology department head, then they'll move to learn from the physics department head, and then they'll move to learn from the chemistry department head. So you're moving from different desk to desk. And lastly, different methods of off-the-job training. So this is, remember, when you're not actually on the job, you're in a separate location, you're not interfering with your workplace. So one that I'm sure you're all familiar with is classroom training, where you're in a different room with a specialized trainer. Another one is called program learning. This is where you learn from a computer. There's a program, like an e-module, and you're sitting down and you're learning from this e-module. And one more type of training that you may actually be familiar with is known as role play. This is where you and a manager have a pretend environment, and you pretend to actually replay the real thing, such as selling a product. The manager may pretend to be a customer, you're the salesman, and you have to convince that manager to buy your product. That's known as role play. And last but not least, Oops, let me see if I can make this thing again. And last but not least will be simulated training. This is where you may actually be using a machine or some sort of device to train. Imagine an airplane pilot. They won't be training in the real plane. They would be training in this big sort of machine that kind of simulates what it would actually be like to be in the real environment. So these are different types of modes of on-the-job training and off-the-job training.